Nancy, we really enjoyed the discussion we just had on American Grace, and I thought this conversation could kind of hit the highlights. And so one of the things that is so fascinating about American Grace is that in many ways it confirms all the things we thought we knew about American religion, and other ways rewrites it. And particularly, I was thinking about the way evangelicals are portrayed in this book. Maybe you'd like to riff on that for a while.
Oh, sure. You know, one of the things that is very interesting about American evangelicalism is that it's incredibly diverse in all kinds of ways. It is not just older white Southerners. It is people across ethnic lines. It is people across age lines, obviously, but also, not nearly all evangelicals are dyed-in-the-wool and really, really committed and true believers. There are lots of evangelicals who are just as marginal and kind of, hanging on to the edges, not really true believers, as you might expect in other religious traditions. So one of the things I think that we often think about when we imagine American evangelicals is that they're all, really good, true believing, attending church every Sunday kind of folks. And there's just an enormous range of diversity there. There's diversity in terms of ethnicity. Obviously, African Americans are like white evangelicals in many ways, but one of the things that this book points out, I think quite rightly, is that they're not just evangelicals who happen to be Black. It really is a distinct religious tradition that they share many of the kinds of beliefs about the importance of the Bible, the importance of Jesus and a saving relationship with Jesus, of proselytizing, those kinds of things. But they put it together in a very different way, and of course have a very strong sense that deep piety, it has to be wedded to a sense of social justice, to engagement with trying to change the structures of the world and so forth. So there's African American Protestantism that kind of looks like evangelicalism, but kind of isn't. One of the other growing segments of the American evangelical landscape is the Pentecostal, and particularly Latino Pentecostal segments of the tradition. So close to 20% of American evangelicals, of younger American evangelicals, are Latino. So we're finding, people coming from all over the world, all over the Latin world, into the U.S. We're very aware of that sort of influx of Spanish-speaking people. And we don't always think about them as evangelicals, but a lot of them are. A lot of them come as evangelicals, or they are converted to evangelicalism once they are in the U.S. So another piece of American evangelicalism that doesn't look like the sort of stereotype of Jerry Falwell or whoever.
I thought one of the most intriguing chapters in the book was the discussion of religion and politics. And so I'm inviting you to say whatever you want to about that.
Well, obviously, religion has been intertwined with politics in U.S. history from day one, in all sorts of different ways. And in terms of our history, of course, we came to a point at the time of the Constitution where we wrote in religious liberty and the separation of church from state authority into our Constitution. That is something that we keep struggling with about exactly what that means. What does it mean for the church not to be involved in the state? Well, it certainly doesn't mean that religious beliefs and political activity or political beliefs don't have anything to do with each other. Clearly people have always been influenced in their thinking about various public issues by their sense of who they are as people of faith. So that kind of belief piece is clearly there and really has been all along. Interestingly, one of the things that comes out in the book is that most people say on surveys that they really don't want to hear about politics at church. that that's not why they go to church. It's real clear that people go to church because they want to be inspired, they want to learn, they want to be with their friends. They don't want to be harangued about who they're supposed to vote for. Now, that doesn't mean that there isn't any political stuff going on as they are participating in their religious communities. Their pastor may not get up in the pulpit and say, you should vote for candidate X, but their pastor may preach about matters of grave concern to the country. And that may get translated into their own sense of, well, that must mean I should vote for this person. But much more importantly, I think what happens in congregations is that people talk to each other. It's not so much that the pastor is telling them what to do, but that they have a community of people that they're exploring, what do you think about this candidate? What do you think about this issue? They're talking to each other. They're saying, hey, I'm going to work at the polls for so-and-so. Would you like to come along and help me? They're doing that kind of hallway and coffee hour organizing that makes religious communities in many ways very important in the overall political scene, even if they don't have a sign out front saying, this is a Democratic polling place or a Democratic, indoctrination center or a Republican place where if you come here, you have to become a Republican.
Nancy, one question that comes to mind with this book is what it bodes for the future. And if you were taking the Putnam and Campbell book and saying, this is the path we're on, is this a hopeful book or are there cautionary tales?
I think it's hopeful. They want it to be a very hopeful book. And in many ways, it is a hopeful book in that it points out the kind of mechanisms that are in place for us getting to know people who are different from us and therefore not being easily sort of roped into thinking that whole categories of people are worthy of eternal damnation and maybe even political isolation. There is this kind of mixing going on in American culture, and that's likely to continue. So in that sense, it's a hopeful book. We've got these mechanisms in place. There are a couple of really cautionary things, I think, about the book. One has to do with religious communities themselves. And again, it's a caution and a hope, the way they write it. The caution is, of course, that we do have a growing population of people who aren't tied to any religious tradition or any religious community, who simply haven't found a place that they see as a compelling connection in their lives. And that's a generational trend, so that we used to say that people who had no religious affiliation were the least good at bringing up their children like themselves. But that's not true anymore. Increasingly, people who are growing up with no religious affiliation stay what we call religious nuns. And so I think we do see the very real likelihood that there will be a really significant portion of the American population that is essentially religiously disaffected and disaffiliated in the years ahead. The hopeful side of that coin is what Putnam and Campbell point out is the incredible innovation that has been a part of American religious history. You don't like the church you're in, go start a new one. We've just done that a lot in our history. So there's no reason to believe that there aren't people out there cooking up something that will draw in some segment of that disaffiliated population so that, the landscape will look different a generation from now, but it may not be as inexorably more secular than we might otherwise think. The other sort of combination of hope and caution, the hope is this constant churn and being confronted with, but learning to get along with people that we're different from. The caution is that there's a small minority in the American population that doesn't really participate in that encounter with diversity, that increasing level of tolerance, that sense that maybe what I think could be modified by getting to know you and hearing what you have to think. Roughly 10% of our population really is in a kind of morally absolutist, relatively intolerant, relatively isolated kind of position, and that's cautionary. They don't talk very much about that 10% in this book, so we're left to kind of wonder, is that population likely to grow, to shrink? Exactly who's in that population?
I want to pick up on that last point about innovation and the ways that religious institutions can change. And so my question is, what's the takeaway if you are kind of in the religion business, as they say? What does this book tell you that you need to know?
Well, one of the things that it tells us is that people come into a new religious community because of what they experience in the kind of big weekly public things that community does. The worship, the music, the preaching, the stuff that is the most immediately publicly visible. That's going to be a key thing that when people are trying to find a new place to be, and because we are so diverse and we move around so much and we marry new people and we move into new neighborhoods, people do this a lot in their lives. They move around. So, what you do on Sunday morning or Friday night Shabbat service or whatever, those are important moments for presenting who we are, as a community, as a people of faith. But the other piece of that story is that that's not what keeps people in a particular religious community. What keeps them is the relationships. And those relationships prove to be incredibly important in all kinds of ways that lots of social scientists and public health people and politicians and everybody else tend to turn out to be interested in, because being in a religious community, being an active participant, having friendships, having relationships with people means that you're happier, you're healthier, you're more neighborly, you're more involved in the political process, you're more involved in volunteering in your community. All kinds of things sort of flow from that engagement with people in a congregation, in a religious community. So when we ask people to come and be involved in a Bible study group or involved in a food pantry ministry or involved in going on a mission trip or whatever, one side of us wants to think, they could be off doing something more productive instead of doing something in the church. Well, it's a loaves and fishes thing here. That the investment that gets made in those relationships, in those conversations, in the stuff that goes on inside those religious communities pays dividends, and pays really big dividends for the larger community and larger society. So that's a big takeaway.